Yuri Antonov arrived at Facility 47B on May 23, 1986, 27 days after the explosion of Unit 4. He was transported in a closed truck from a checkpoint on the edge of the exclusion zone along a dirt road winding between abandoned villages. The driver was silent, and the windows were covered with tarpaulins. Antonov sat on a wooden bench in the back of the truck, holding a sealed metal container with the words "Special Importance. Do not open" scrawled in white on it. The facility was located 3 kilometers from the plant, underground, in a former Civil Defense Command bunker. The entrance was guarded by 6 soldiers in hazmat suits, armed with automatic weapons. A senior lieutenant checked Antonov's documents, compared his photograph with his face, then ran a dosimeter over his clothes and shoes. The device was silent. The radiation levels here remained within normal limits. The lieutenant opened the steel door and pointed down a concrete staircase. The interior smelled of damp, antiseptic, and machine oil. The corridor was lit by fluorescent lamps mounted in the ceiling every 5 meters. Antonov passed 3 locked doors marked Warehouse, Generator, and Sanitary Checkpoint, and stopped at the 4th. It had no sign. The lieutenant knocked twice, waited for a return knock from inside, and then unlocked it. Behind the door was a room measuring 4 by 6 meters. Concrete walls, a bare floor, 1 table, 2 chairs, and a tape recorder on the table. Against the far wall stood a metal cage about 2 meters high, welded from rebar. Inside the cage, on the floor, sat a creature. Antonov paused in the doorway and watched. The creature was the size of a large dog, but its body structure matched no known animal. Its forelimbs were long, with 5 toes ending in claws. The hind limbs were shorter, bent like a bird's. The head was round, hairless, and the skin was gray with a damp sheen. There were no eyes, but instead 2 smooth hollows. The mouth was a horizontal slit with no lips. Major Leonid Krylov, the facility's commander, was waiting for Antonov at the desk. Krylov was short, with sparse hair and fingers yellowed from nicotine. He handed Antonov a folder containing instructions, 12 typewritten pages, the last page marked Top Secret. Of special importance. Antonov read the first paragraph. Subject discovered in the basement of an apartment building in Pripyat on April 29. He is not aggressive, exhibits signs of intelligence, and is capable of communication. Krylov explained that the subject was making sounds similar to Russian, but linguists had been unable to compile a full analysis. A specialist in working with non-standard sources of information was needed. Antonov knew what this definition meant. His last assignment had ended in failure. The subject died of a heart attack before extracting a confession. The case was closed, and Antonov was transferred to the reserve. Now he was being given a second chance. He accepted the folder, signed for it, and asked to be left alone with the subject. Krylov left. The door was locked from the outside. Antonov sat at the table, turned on the tape recorder, and announced the date, time, and location of the interview. Then he addressed the creature in the cage, asking the first question as instructed: "Identify yourself." The creature didn't move. Antonov repeated the question louder. The creature turned its head in his direction, though it had no eyes. Then it opened its mouth. The voice was human, male, medium-pitched, without an accent. He said, "Yuri Vladimirovich Antonov, born 1948, senior detective, transferred to this facility following the incident with Pavel Rogozin, interrogated in case number 812, who died of cardiac arrest in Lefortovo pretrial detention center on February 3, 1986. Antonov felt a chill rise from the back of his neck to his temples. This information was classified. Only 3 officers and the department chief had access. He stopped the tape recorder, stood up, and approached the cage. The creature remained motionless. Antonov asked how it knew this information. The creature replied, "I heard you talking about it in your sleep." Antonov took a step back. He didn't remember his dreams. He had never spoken about the incident with Rogozin to anyone, not even his wife. He returned to the table, turned the tape recorder back on, and continued the interrogation according to protocol. Over the next 3 hours, he asked the subject 42 questions. The subject answered each question, but the answers didn't match the questions. When Antonov asked about its origin, the subject named people who worked at the plant. When he asked about the purpose of its presence in the zone, the subject quoted the operating instructions for the RBMK reactor. When he asked how many such creatures were in the zone, the subject remained silent for exactly 60 seconds, then gave the phone number of Antonov's Moscow apartment. By evening, Antonov concluded the first session and called Krylov. The major entered with a technician, a young sergeant named Ibragimov, responsible for equipment maintenance. Antonov handed over the recording and asked for a floor to be created. A transcription. Krylov took the tape, told Ibragimov to bring Antonov dinner, and left. Ibragimov returned 20 minutes later with a tray, canned goods, bread, and a thermos of tea. Antonov ate, never taking his eyes off the cage. The creature sat in the same position, motionless. Ibragimov paused by the door, then whispered if it was true that the subject was speaking with a human voice. Antonov nodded. Ibragimov asked if he could listen in. Antonov disobeyed instructions and allowed it. Ibragimov approached the cage. The creature turned to him. Its mouth opened. The voice had changed. It was now a woman's voice, young, with a southern accent. It said, "Layla is waiting for you in Tashkent. She's pregnant. You won't be returning." Ibragimov turned pale, backed away, and ran out of the room. Antonov was left alone. He realized he'd made a mistake. That night, he slept on a cot in the next room. A soft scraping sound came through the wall, a creature scraping its claws on the concrete floor. Antonov woke at 4 in the morning because the scraping had stopped. A voice spoke in its place. The voice spoke non-stop, changing timbre every few minutes. Male, female, childish, elderly. It listed names, dates, addresses. Antonov recognized several people from his previous cases, witnesses, informants, convicts. The voice knew them all. In the morning, Ibragimov didn't show up for duty. Krylov sent 2 soldiers to the barracks. They found the sergeant in the shower, sitting on the floor under a stream of cold water. Ibragimov kept repeating the same sentence, "I shouldn't have listened." They sent him to the medical center, administered a sedative, and placed him under observation. By lunchtime, he had stopped speaking altogether. Antonov filed a protocol violation report, stating that he had allowed an unauthorized person to be present while working with the subject. Krylov accepted the report without comment. The second interrogation session began at 2 p.m. Antonov changed tactics. Instead of direct questions, he attempted to establish basic communication through simple commands. He asked the subject to raise its forelimb. The subject did. He asked it to turn its head to the left. The subject did. The commands were carried out precisely, without hesitation. Antonov recorded the results in the report, sensing a faint hope. Perhaps the creature was trainable. Perhaps it could be studied using standard methods. Then he asked the subject to pronounce its name. The subject opened its mouth and spoke in Antonov's own voice. An exact copy of the timbre, intonation, and manner of speech. He said, "I am Yuri Vladimirovich Antonov, and I know what I did to Rogozin. I held him by the throat until he stopped breathing. I wrote in the report that it was a heart attack. I thought no one would know." Antonov turned off the tape recorder, grabbed a chair, and threw it into the cage. The chair hit the bars and fell. The subject didn't move. Krylov entered 10 minutes later. Antonov was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall. The major picked up the chair, put it back, and asked what had happened. Antonov replied that the subject was exhibiting hostile behavior and that the conditions of detention needed to be changed. Krylov disagreed. An order from Moscow required continued interrogations until concrete results were obtained. Antonov asked to see the order. Krylov refused, citing his security clearance. That evening, Antonov received a transcript of the first session. 12 typewritten pages, with every word the subject had written verbatim. Antonov read and realized the text contained information that could not have been known to the being under any circumstances. The names of agents operating abroad. Access codes to archives. Details of operations conducted in the 1970s. Everything was accurate, everything was verifiable. On the last page, a handwritten note read, "Checked with documents. 100% match. Colonel Zhukov." Antonov went up to Krylov's office and demanded an explanation. The major was sitting at his desk, smoking, and looking out the window. He said that Object 47B had existed since April 28, but the subject hadn't been brought here from Pripyat. He had been found in an underground storage facility beneath Unit 3 3 days before the accident. The station's security had handed him over to the security service, the security service had handed him over to the KGB, and the KGB had organized the subject's evacuation during the station's evacuation. Everything else was just a cover story. Antonov asked how many people knew about this. Krylov replied, 12, including the two of them. Antonov asked why they needed an interrogation if the subject already knew everything. Krylov stubbed out his cigarette, turned to Antonov, and uttered a single phrase. "The order is to find out how he knows this and record everything he says, regardless of the content." The third session began the next morning. Antonov stayed up all night, preparing a new list of questions. He decided to take a direct approach, to ask the subject about his origins, his purpose, and the methods of obtaining information. He entered the room, turned on the tape recorder, and sat down at the table. The subject sat motionless in the cage, as always. Antonov asked the first question, "Who are you?" The subject responded immediately, in Krylov's voice, "I am the one who listens. I exist where people keep what they want to forget." Antonov. After Antonov recorded the answer, he asked a second question, "Where did you come from?" The subject responded in the voice of a woman Antonov didn't recognize. "I was here before the station, before the city, before the war. I was here when they built the first storage facility." Antonov continued asking questions for 4 hours. The subject answered each time in a different voice, but the answers formed a coherent picture. The creature claimed to have been underground for decades, feeding on information people left in closed rooms, secret documents, interrogation tapes, personal confessions. It didn't read or see, it heard the thoughts of those who read these documents and memorized them. It grew with each new secret, each new fear, each new lie written down on paper and hidden in the archives. Antonov stopped the tape recorder and asked, without recording, "Why are you telling me this?" The subject turned its head, and for the first time, Antonov felt the creature looking at him, despite its lack of eyes. It opened its mouth and spoke in Antonov's voice, not the way Antonov spoke now, but the way he had spoken 20 years ago, when he was just starting out, because now you, too, are part of the archive. Everything you heard, everything you recorded, it will remain. And you will leave, but the recording will remain. And everyone who listens to it will become a part of me. Antonov ran out of the room and went up to Krylov's office. The major was gone. The duty officer reported that Krylov had left for Kiev to report to the commission. Antonov demanded to be contacted by radio. The radio was down, all channels were busy with official communications regarding the aftermath of the accident. He returned to the room with the subject. The tape recorder was playing, Antonov had forgotten to turn it off before leaving. He rewound the tape and listened to the recording. It contained his own voice asking questions, and the subject's voice answering. But between the questions and the answers there were pauses that Antonov didn't remember. Long pauses, 30 to 40 seconds long. He listened to these pauses at maximum volume. There was noise in them, quiet breathing, the rustle of clothing, the creak of a chair. His breathing. His movements. But he didn't remember being silent for so long. He examined the room more closely. In the corner, behind the cage, he noticed a small hole in the wall, a ventilation grate covered with a metal plate. He approached and removed the plate. Behind it was a narrow duct, descending at an angle. A cold, musty smell emanated from the duct. Antonov shone his flashlight into it. At the bottom of the duct, 3 meters deep, lay tape recorder cassettes. Dozens of cassettes, dumped down the shaft. Krylov returned late that evening. Antonov met him at the entrance and demanded an explanation. The major led him into his office, closed the door, and took a folder from the safe. The folder contained interrogation reports, 15 sessions conducted before Antonov's arrival. 15 different officers. All records were destroyed. All officers were transferred to other facilities or discharged for health reasons. Krylov explained that Antonov was the 16th, and his task was not to obtain information from the subject, but to create a complete record of what the subject knew for subsequent analysis and archiving. After that, the recording would be confiscated, Antonov would be transferred, and the facility would be mothballed. Antonov asked, "What if I refuse to continue?" Krylov replied, "It's too late. You've listened to him for 4 sessions. You've recorded 12 hours of material. You're part of the project." The final session took place on June 10. Antonov conducted it according to the full protocol, asked all the remaining questions from the approved list, and recorded all the subject's answers. The creature spoke calmly, in detail, naming names, dates, and locations. It recounted 37 secret operations conducted within the USSR and abroad from 1951 to 1986. It named 112 agents embedded in foreign intelligence agencies. It cited the contents of documents that officially never existed. When the session ended, Antonov turned off the tape recorder, ejected the cassette, and handed it to Krylov. The Major accepted the recording, signed the materials receipt log, and said goodbye to Antonov. 2 hours later, Antonov left Facility 47B. He was taken away in the same truck, along the same road. In Moscow, he received a new assignment, Senior Inspector in the Personnel Department of the Central Office, desk work, no travel. Facility 47B was officially closed June 23, 1986. All materials were confiscated, personnel disbanded, and the subject, according to protocol, was disposed of by thermal treatment. The bunker was flooded, the entrances concreted. A single line remained in the facility reports: biological sample of unknown origin. Military significance not established. Facility liquidated. Antonov worked in the HR department for 14 years. He retired in 2001 and received an apartment, state awards, and a personal pension. He remarried and had a son. He wrote a memoir about his service in the KGB, but the publisher rejected the manuscript. It was too long. There are many unconfirmed facts. He never spoke about Facility 47B, although he had the same dream every night. He was sitting in a concrete room, a cage in front of him, and in the cage, a creature opened its mouth and spoke in his voice. In 2018, he received a letter. An official letter from the FSB archive notifying him of the declassification of documents. The list of declassified materials read: Protocols of the Operation of Special Facility 47B, Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, April-June 1986. Attached to the letter was an inventory list, 38 audio cassettes, 312 pages of transcripts, and 42 photographs. Antonov submitted a request to review the materials. The response came 6 months later. The materials had been transferred to a special storage facility, access was restricted, and permission from an interdepartmental commission was required. Antonov submitted an application to the commission, stating that he was a direct participant in the work and had the right to review them. The application was rejected without explanation. He resubmitted it, enclosing copies of his service documents and award certificates. There was no response. In 2020, he overheard a radio interview with a historian studying declassified KGB archives. The historian mentioned discovering a strange series of documents related to Chernobyl, interrogation transcripts of an unidentified individual, conducted between April and June of 1986. The documents contained information, the accuracy of which had been independently confirmed, but the origin of the information remained unexplained. The historian added that the interrogation transcripts had been digitized and would be available to researchers after the examination was completed. Antonov found the historian's contact information, wrote a letter, and requested a meeting. The historian responded a week later and agreed. They met at a cafe in central Moscow. Antonov described his involvement in the project, the individual, and the recordings. The historian listened attentively, taking notes. Then he pulled out his tablet, opened the file, and played the audio recording. A voice came over the speakers. Antonov's voice, as it had been 34 years ago. The voice asked, "Who are you?" Then a pause. Then another voice, unfamiliar, answered, "I am the one listening." The historian stopped the playback, looked at Antonov, and said, "Do you recognize your voice?" Antonov nodded. The historian continued, "The recording is 12 hours long. We've listened to 3 hours of it. Everything it says is verifiable fact. Everything is accurate. We don't understand how this is possible." Antonov asked to hear the full recording. The historian refused. Access was restricted by the Commission's decision. The full materials would not be published until 2025. Antonov insisted. The historian shook his head, closed his tablet, apologized, and left. Antonov returned home, turned on his computer, opened his browser, and searched for Object 47B Chernobyl. There were no results. He tried other combinations of words. Nothing. He went to the FSB archive website, found the section on declassified documents, and scrolled through the list. There were no documents on Facility 47B. The next day, he called the archive. The operator connected him with the help desk. He gave the facility's number and asked to confirm the availability of the materials. The operator asked him to wait. He waited 7 minutes. Then the operator came back on the line and said, "Nothing matched your request. You may have entered the wrong facility number." Antonov hung up. He sat by the window, looking out onto the street. People walked along the sidewalk, cars drove along the road, and somewhere in the distance, a jackhammer was working. An ordinary day. Ordinary life. Everything as usual. But Antonov knew that the recordings existed. They were listened to. They were studied. And everyone who listened to them became part of what the subject had said. And someday, these recordings would be available to everyone. And then everyone who heard them would know what he knew. He stood up, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out a box of personal documents. Among the certificates and IDs lay a small notebook with an oilcloth cover, the one he'd used to keep personal notes while working at the facility. He turned to the last page. It contained a single phrase he couldn't remember writing: "I listened, and now it listens to me."